There is something strange about the time that we live in. Never before have people talked so openly about mental health, and never before have we had so many explanations, labels, frameworks, and tools. And yet, people feel more empty, more anxious, and more directionless than ever. So the question isn't whether we understand suffering, the question is whether we are responding to it in the right way. And here's an idea that almost sounds offensive to the modern ear, to the modern mind, that responsibility might be the fastest antidepressant that we have. Not just medication, affirmation, or endless self analysis, but pure and raw responsibility. When people hear the word depression, they usually imagine this sort of unfathomable sadness, but depression is not just sadness. It is a loss of agency. It is the feeling that nothing that you do matters in this world, that your actions do not change anything, and that life is happening to you and not through you. And that is why depressed people don't just feel bad, they feel heavy, they feel paralyzed and disconnected from cause and effect, and modern culture, with good intentions, often makes this worse. We tell people to rest, to be gentle with themselves, to wait until they feel better, but the longer someone remains disconnected from responsibility, the more their sense of urgency dissolves, and without agency, hope cannot survive. Responsibility does something very specific to the mind. It reconnects action to meaning. The moment that you're responsible for something, a task, a role, a commitment, another person, your attention shifts outward. You stop circling your inner state. You stop constantly asking, how do I feel right now? And instead, the question becomes, what needs to be done? What must be done? And that shift alone is extremely powerful, because depression thrives on an inward collapse, while responsibility forces outward orientation, not toward pleasure or comfort necessarily, but toward valuable function. And function is grounding, but this is where things get uncomfortable. Comfort feels like kindness, but prolonged comfort without responsibility quietly erodes the psyche. When nothing is required of you, nothing calls you forward. Your days blur together, effort feels pointless, and time loses structure. And without structure, the mind turns inward and starts feeding on itself. And this is why people can have all of their basic needs met and still feel empty. Because meaning doesn't come from safety alone, it comes from being needed. And there is something deeply stabilizing about being useful. When someone relies on you, even a small way, your suffering no longer defines you. You might still feel low, you might still struggle, but you're no longer only your mood. You're a person with a role, and roles give shape to identity. And this is why, historically, responsibility was not seen as a burden, but as a path to maturity. You didn't wait to feel whole before taking responsibility, you became whole by carrying responsibility. Even modern psychology keeps rediscovering this. When people feel low, disconnected, or purposeless, one of the most effective interventions is not insight, it is engagement. Doing something small, structured, and meaningful, something that produces a visible effect, because action precedes motivation. Motivation precedes clarity. Not because the mind magically changes, but because agency is restored. The moment you see that your actions matter again, the fog in your mind begins to thin. Depression traps people in the present moment. And it isn't a peaceful present, it is a stagnant present moment. While responsibility introduces the idea of tomorrow. If I don't show up, something breaks. If I don't act, something is lost. And that sense of consequence reintroduces the idea of time, and with time comes hope. Hope isn't just optimism. Hope is the belief that your actions can shape what comes next. Responsibility makes that belief rational. And here is the paradox. When someone feels depressed, responsibility feels unbearable, but avoiding responsibility deepens the depression. So the mind comes up with excuses. I need to heal first, I'm not ready yet, I don't have the energy, but readiness doesn't come before responsibility. It comes from it. Energy follows engagement, confidence follows competence, meaning follows contribution, and not the other way around. And this isn't about overwhelming yourself. It is not about heroic transformation in one day. It starts small. Waking up at a consistent time, finishing one task, keeping one promise, showing up somewhere regularly. These things seem trivial, but psychologically they are massive. Each completed responsibility is evidence that I still have impact, and that evidence slowly rebuilds the inner structure that depression erodes. And here's the part that people do not like to hear. You can be deeply compassionate towards suffering without turning it into an excuse for withdrawal. In fact, sometimes the most compassionate thing that you can do is place responsibility back into someone's hands. Not all responsibility, not crushing responsibility, but real responsibility. Enough to remind the psyche of that person that you are still a participant in life. Responsibility does not cure depression overnight, but it does something more important. It stops the bleeding. It reconnects action to meaning. It restores dignity. It gives the mind a reason to stay engaged, and that is why responsibility is not the enemy of mental health. It is one of its foundations. So if you feel low, numb, or disconnected, don't just ask what you need to feel better. Ask, what is one responsibility that I've been avoiding that could restore my sense of agency? Not someday, but today. Because meaning doesn't just come from feeling good, it comes from being needed. And responsibility is often the first place where that need reappears.